Hello, hello, hello. Good morning. Welcome to today's stream, today's workshop. We're going to be talking about lighting. We're going to be painting a lot of spheres. Hello, hello. Just waiting for this to connect. Hello, hello, good morning. Morning, mate. How are you guys doing? I'm doing pretty good. It is a good day. It's sunny. And I've got a lot to talk about. a lot to talk about. So I was planning today to do a kind of shading tutorial or shading workshop. Since last time we talked a bit about character design, we sketched out the kid with the gun, and I finished up that character during the week, but I didn't have time during the week. I was just too stuffed with other stuff. But I did work on an older illustration and did a video on lighting that you can see on YouTube. But today I wanted to break down some of that thought process and explain a bit more of the theory behind it, since I don't really go in depth on that on the YouTube video. I just talk about like my layer stack. So yeah, so we're gonna talk about lighting theory. We're gonna talk about bit of color theory, and I attached this working PSD lighting _ practices spheres, which I'm too lazy to change the S out of practices now, but you guys can download that if you want, and follow along. So there's these let me just show you. So there's these spheres here, and I set up the layer stack for you so you can see how it's done. And it's pretty simple. You have a masked group with a bunch of circles for what are going to be the spheres. Then you have this kind of gray fill, which is the base color of your spheres. And then you have like a little stack for every light source. I'm just coming up with the lighting for the challenge. Sweet. Yeah, so this is coordinating perfectly then. Yeah, I'm guessing most people are, if they're participating, they're kind of in that final stage of rendering and doing that kind of thing. So even if you don't choose to use this technique to render, it's still a useful technique to think about lighting, or it's a useful exercise to practice thinking about lighting and doing that sort of doing more of that like theory practice. And yeah, so sweet. So let's get into it. So let's talk about, we're gonna get to these spheres a little later, but let's just talk generally about lighting and how I like to think about lighting. And I'm gonna go about this with my favorite metaphor for light, and that's thinking about light as rain. So why do I think about it as rain? So if you think this is like a 2D sphere on the ground. Let me just get my notes brushes. Okay, so rain tends to fall in a direction, right? So let's say rain is coming down from the sky, and rain generally falls parallel to other droplets. So all the droplets are falling in the same direction. Sometimes you'll get tornado rain, but we're gonna stick with parallel rain because it's gonna simplify things. So if this sphere were to be rained on, it would be wet from this half of the sphere up. So this would be wet, and this down here would be dry. And right along the edge here, right where that rain misses the sphere, now this area here, let's put little splatter marks. This is going to be wet, wet, and then this here is going to be dry. And basically what this is saying in lighting terms is that the wet is in light and the dry is in shadow. So here you would have a cast shadow. I'm just going to put CS here. And at this point here, running right along where the wet and the dry, that line that splits between the two, this is called either your core shadow or your terminator. So the terminator is that line that splits light from shadow. And this, the rain, the direction of the rain, is the direction of your light source. So for a parallel light source like this would be sunlight. So this is exactly how sunlight works. You have light coming in a parallel rays, and where it hits the sphere, it's wet, it's light, and where it doesn't, where it's dry, there's shadow. Now, what I like about this metaphor is that you can also think about bounce light and all these other things, like how light bleeds through objects in the same way that water interacts with objects. So, for example, when rain hits the ground, it splatters, you know? So if you're holding an umbrella over your head and it's pouring rain really, really hard, your feet and legs are still going to get wet because the rain is hitting the ground and splattering back up. So basically, the harder it rains, the more splattering, the more reflection is going to happen. So the brighter the light source, same thing. You're going to have more light that bounces back up into the sphere. So the light here in this case, like the rain that's hitting the ground, is going to hit the bottom of the sphere, and this is your bounce light. So this is the reflected light, your sort of ambient, the light that bounces around in the environment and lights the bottom of the sphere. Okay, so that's the rain metaphor, and it works, you know, particularly for sunlight. But let's look at it from another direction. So let's say your rain is coming in from this direction now, from an angle. So you're going to have that line here that, wait, let me get this right. So here you're going to have your shadow. This is a little tricky. So these parallel lines are going to cast a shadow on the ground, and your shadow is going to be this long. And this is going to be your cast shadow. And the rain that's coming in here, so now I'm going to talk about rain and light as the same thing. So if I say rain or light, I'm using them interchangeably. So the light that comes in here is going to bounce off the ground, right? It's going to skip. And you're going to get a lot of bounce light hitting this side, right? But you're not going to get any on this side, right? Because the light is coming over here and it's bouncing out towards that direction. So you're not going to have any bounce light on this side of the sphere. Does that make sense? And then the terminator, right, is going to be at this angle, right? So everything in here is going to be wet / light, and everything down here is going to be dry. shadow. And that's your core shadow / terminator. And that's pretty much it. Light's either coming from an angle or it's coming from straight down. It's never, there's only those two options. It's always coming from a direction. So at least sunlight. Sunlight's always coming from a direction. In terms of illustration, I mostly use, this is the easiest way to think about light. Once you start to think about like point lights, then you run into a bunch of other factors, like the conal, like what's the cone of the point light, how small is it, how far is it from the object, and lighting becomes a lot harder to calculate when illustrating. So it's easy to start with this and then dial things back, you know, to make it look more like a point light, kind of like fading it away or doing other things to change the nature of the light source. But to think about the basic math of the light when drawing or illustrating in this way, just thinking about parallel lines, thinking about the light bouncing off and in a very predictable way, like this. You know, this angle is predictable, right? It's just, you know, it's creating like the angle that it's coming into the ground. It'll bounce off at the same angle, right? And I think that the wet, sort of wet dry metaphor is a good representation of what happens to the light. So if we just kind of shade this in to follow this this little graph, we'd have light on this side of the sphere, and that terminator is going to be, you know, you're not going to have any light that passes that. And then here you'd have a little bit of bounce light coming off the ground, just as a light sort of dapple, right? So if we take that off, then we have a nicely shaded sphere. If we were to do the same thing for the first version, right, for this one, we'd have our light source coming from the top, bathing our sphere in light, and then we'd have kind of a uniform amount of wetness or bounce light on the bottom. And I'm just going to knock that back a little bit and take the graph away, and you get this light source. So you can see how they're a little bit different from one another with the uniformity of the bounce light. But that's pretty much it. When you know, you can combine them together. Now you have two lights coming from, you know, one from above and one from the side. There's a lot of overlap, but if you were to, we'll talk about combining light sources in a little while. So that's basically that's basically how I think about light. It's a lot of scribbles, but yeah. So that's the basic metaphor, and now we're going to talk about combining different lighting schemes. So the way we set up lights, almost like in a studio, will give a different you know, a different mood. You can tell different stories. You need to think about your intention about when lighting an object. So are you trying to create something really dramatic? Are you trying to show the design, like to have really clear lighting, so that nothing is ambiguous, everything is kind of lit in the same way and everything is legible that way? Or are you trying to to make something that's just really cinematic and you know, maybe it's dark and moody, or yeah, you're trying to convey that the character is in a certain environment. So yeah, the main strategies though that I like to use, and look, there are hundreds of different ways of lighting an object, so I'm not going to talk about every single one, but I will talk about the really basic principles. If you have more than 3 points, like 3 lights, it starts to get really complicated because you need to balance those lights. So the more lights you have, and you might think like, you know, the more complex your lighting scheme is, the cooler your illustration's going to be, but it's really not the case. You know, you can have an extremely beautiful illustration with a really simple lighting scheme, and the best example I can give of that is like a Caravaggio painting. And I'll just look this up on Google. But like Caravaggio was known for what's called chiaroscuro, and chiaroscuro is using only one light source, like a candle or sunlight or something like this. And so there's very, very little bounce light. There's no secondary light that's picking up the shadows, or that's lifting the shadows, and it creates very, very dramatic images, like very dramatic illustrations that show form really well. So you can see here, like there's only one light source coming from the left, and you know, it's showing the form of the anatomy, it's showing the form of the cloth, the portraits, everything, and it casts these really dark shadows. So this would be a 1-point light or lighting scheme, and you know, that's all he needed to create an amazing illustration. And this is really easy to calculate too, because you don't have to think about this another light. You know, you don't have to paint what's in the dark or what's in the shadow, because there's no light there, so you just can't see it, and you can just focus all your details on what's in the light. So that's like the best example I could find of like how a 1-point lighting scheme is used. But it just goes to show that having a simpler lighting scheme doesn't necessarily mean that your illustration is more boring. So let's get back to this. So 1-point light is basically this, right? What we talked about. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to shade all these spheres in different directions of a 1-point light. So the way I set this up is that you have your spheres are masked here in the group, and this shade of gray is actually the sphere cast in shadow. So we're only going to be adding light to these spheres. So everything here is bathed in shadow, and it's on a 50% gray background so that I can judge my values. And the shade of this shadow, right? The value of this shadow is between like 30 and 50% to black. So that means that this sphere is going to be like, if I double this in height, like the local value is around here, you know. So it's not a white sphere. It's a bit of a darker gray sphere because that shadow is here. So you can kind of reverse engineer how light or how dark, like if you have your value, your local value in light, you can figure out the shadow value by going halfway to black. And if you know your shadow value, then you can figure out what your light value is by just doubling it, like doubling the value. So all that to say, this is the shadows, this is the spheres bathed in shadow, and we're going to reveal the form using light. So depending on the direction I'm choosing, so I'm going to think about these three-dimensionally now, not just in 2D. And we're gonna light all these. So I like to start off. These are color dodge layers. They're locked. So if I were to paint with white, it would blow out the highlights very quickly. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to paint with gray. And that way, even if I go, you know, fully light gray, it's kind of just, it's adding all the light without adding the specular highlight. So if I wanted to add a specular highlight, I'd have to go a little bit higher and add a specular highlight. So let's go with here, and we're going to start with a 1-point light source coming from straight in the middle. So if we have a 1-point light coming from straight in center, remember it's going to cover half of that hemisphere. So we can kind of put a note. You know, if we were to draw an ellipse, that's kind of wrapping in, so that's kind of the equator. That's a terminator line, right? The light needs to fill in this top hemisphere. So if we have our light basically that it's hitting that direction, or maybe in this one it's hitting in this direction and it's hitting right here, then we can find, you know, where that terminator line is in 3D through that sphere. So we know that all of this is going to be in light, depending on, you know, the direction of the light source. So this is really good practice, just in general, to practice control, to practice your brush control. It's harder than it looks to get the halftones right, and to get, you know, it reading properly, not to overwork it because it'll feel mushy. So I think that one's fine like that. We can do one coming. I like to start from where it hits the sphere directly and then radiate out from that with the soft brush. So I can kind of start in the center and then circle my way out. So this one's hitting a little bit more on the side. Let's put one here from the bottom. And we'll put it a little bit in front. It's not quite coming from the side. And yeah, so now I'm going to kind of fill in the bounce light. So if I were to have, if this were to be on the ground, for instance, you'd have quite a bit of bounce light coming in here on this one. On this side, you'd have quite a bit of bounce on the bottom. Let me make my background just a little bit darker. Not that one, this one. Just so we can see that here. And here, because this is already hitting on from the bottom, maybe you wouldn't have much bounce light. You know, maybe you'd have a different skylight, but that would be a 2-point light source. So I'm not going to put any bounce light on this one. The light's coming from the bottom, and then what's not hitting is just going out into the abyss. It's not bouncing off the ground, right? Because if the light is coming from the bottom, it's not ever hitting the ground, if that makes any sense. Okay, and the last thing we're going to add on this is a specular highlight. So depending on the roughness of your material, your specular highlight might be more or less diffused. And the specular highlight is going, you know, there's more math behind this, but if this is where the light is hitting your sphere directly, and this is your terminator, or sorry, this is where the light is hitting your sphere directly. So it's coming from in on this angle. And you are looking at the sphere. Let me just let me put these notes on a different layer up here. Okay. Third time's the charm. Okay, so this is where your light is hitting, and you are looking at the sphere straight on, right? Like the camera angle is looking at the sphere right there. The specular highlight is going to happen about right in between. So this is where your brightest spot on the sphere is going to be. So I'm not going to go into tons of math about this, but basically if the light is coming in from the side, so if we look at this and your camera is here, the specular highlight needs to bounce off the surface at an equal angle so that it gets to the camera, right? So that's kind of the reasoning behind it. So all that said, I'm going to go a little bit lighter than 50% gray. This one is coming in from the top center, so I'll go a little bit lower and add my specular highlight. This one's coming from the side, so I'll go a little bit in and add my specular highlight there. And this one's coming from the bottom here, so let me put it right here. And those are a little bit bright, so let me knock them back. You don't need a lot of, they don't need to be super bright. Okay, so now we're going to speed run the rest of these because I also need a first point if we're going to do 2 points and 3 points. So, speed round. Okay, so this one let's do up here. And we can make those. So what I was talking about earlier about starting with with thinking about it as sunlight, and then kind of simplifying from there. So if you make that first key light, so this is the key light, it's the main light source. If you make it smaller, then it becomes more of a point light than sunlight. So it's not going to reach that terminator point, that equator of the sphere if it's just a point light, because it can't wrap around the sphere completely, unless the point light happens to be bigger than the sphere, and then it's gonna wrap around. But let's do that. Let's do this here. And let's do one from basically straight on. Actually, for this 3-point lighting one, I'm going to stay pretty much in the center. Just from slightly different angles, since and it needs to be more prominent. So here, bounce, bounce, no bounce. Okay, so we have our first our first light. And these are coming from all sorts of different directions. You know, these aren't super perfect, but you'll see that the illusion really comes in. Man, this one's not so great. Okay, let me just fix this one real fast. Real fast, real fast. Okay. Okay, so the nice thing about this layer setup, if you're watching my video that I posted yesterday, is that we have this soft light layer. This is currently set to 50% gray so that it doesn't affect anything. But if we colorize this layer, so Control U to bring up your hue saturation slider, we can colorize, bring the saturation all the way up. We can change the color and intensity of the light. So this is like a just cool Photoshop trick. I'm sure you can do it in any other program that calculates layers the same way. But let's say we wanted to make this a bit of a warm light source. Can bring the saturation down a little bit. So now we have just a bit of a warmer light, you know. If we wanted a cooler light, then we can change it more over to blue. And it doesn't destroy what you did below. So this, you know, where you put the light stays the same. Now let's move on to 2-point and 3-point lights. So when we talk about two-point lights, or a 2-point lighting scheme, we need to start to balance what each light is doing. So rarely will you ever have, actually, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to take one of these and put it way over to the side. Because this is also like, you know, your light doesn't have to come from the front. You know, it could come from the back too, and just be like more of like a rim light. So I'm just going to put that there for the sake of the example. So your first light needs to be your main light. So it's going to be brighter, or it's going to reveal more of the form than your second light. And every light after that is either going to come and it's going to have a different purpose. So it'll either come lift the shadows, it'll add contrast to the silhouette by being like a rim light. It might just be toning the whole image, you know, as like a kind of floodlight or a fill light. So your second light in a 2-point light source is going to have one of those functions. And I'll do kind of like 3 of them here. So let me just bring up the intensity of that light. So here, our second light, if we take it off, we're just going to hide that, is going to be a light source coming from the back, and it's just going to be a rim light. So it's going to be picking out that silhouette. And I need to treat it the same way as I would any other light. You know, it's not just a 2D shape that's wrapping around the contour. This is lighting the whole back of the sphere, and we're just seeing this portion because the terminator is here. But that terminator continues through the back of the sphere, right? We just don't see it. So let me erase all that. I'm gonna have to repaint this. Oh well. So this is gonna be a rim light coming from the back, and it's gonna be a bright light. And you can see when we combine it with our first light, you know, where it overlaps, it's going to be a little bit brighter, but it's picking out that silhouette. So that's our sort of first scheme. And I can edit these kind of separately to make them work together in a nicer way. So there, we have our first light and our second light, and this light is a rim light. The second one here, I'm gonna add kind of a second light, but just opposite. And this light kind of creates the opposite, or this lighting scheme kind of creates the opposite effect of having this kind of point light down the center. So instead of separating the form of your object with shadow on two sides and light down the middle, you're putting shadow down the middle and light on two sides. So here's our second one, and bring intensity of that up a little bit. And then our third one, this is just going to be a fill light. So if we have our intense light coming from the back and outlining the silhouette, then we might have a much lower intensity light coming from this side, and it just kind of fills the rest of the form. And now I'm just going to make this black, almost black. There, we can see this a lot better now. So these are like our second light sources, and they have a different function. So this isn't bounce light, right? This is a soft light that's being projected up into the form so that it's lifting the shadows. So if these shadows were really dark, for example, like, I can't do this way. If these were like a really dark shadow, it would basically, like everything, like the Caravaggio painting, everything in shadow would just go into black and you wouldn't be able to see it anymore. And if you wanted to reveal some of that form that's in the shadow, then you would add a fill light like this. So that just kind of lifts the shadow. Okay, and a 3-point light is basically the same thing. So your second and third lights, second and third light are just going to accentuate different parts of the form. So let me just fill in this second light. So we're going to have a rim light here. Maybe let's do a rim light here. I'm not being super creative with this. And a rim light bottom. Okay, and our third light can kind of be either another rim light, so we can add it in maybe on this side. That's going to multiply on top of our main light source, right? It's going to be extra bright. We could put one that is bigger, maybe, that kind of really takes up a lot of that rim. So this would be almost directly behind the sphere, but it would be a very big light source. So it's picking up a lot of that silhouette here. And then this one here, maybe it's just a skylight. So this is just a kind of a fill light that's bringing out the top. And I'm just gonna hide my other light sources so that I can kind of see what it's doing alone. So it's just gonna be a very soft light from the top. Sweet. So these are starting to look very formy now. They're looking very spherical, and that's because the more the if you set up your lights properly, in the way that they follow the form, in the way they wrap around the form, it's just accentuating the fact that it's a sphere. You know, it's your lighting is always the thing that's going to be revealing the form of the object. So if you put, let's say, let's say you wanted to add a rim light. And you kind of add it in like as a straight line, like that. This line doesn't, it doesn't show that, like, it doesn't show the curvature of the sphere. So it's going to feel like a very flat object. You want to be following the form, that terminator, that equator line, that ellipse that wraps around the shape of the object. And the more complex your object becomes, if you're shading like anatomy, for example, it's not just a sphere. There's a lot of complex forms. Or if you're shading clothing, you know, you have the forms of all the cloth and stuff. Then it becomes harder to follow that contour, but it's still really important to do so that your object feels three-dimensional. Okay, so now we can play around with colors. So we have this this main. Actually, let's before we play around with the colors of our light, we can play around with the colors of our spheres. So let me turn all my lights off, and I'm just gonna add colors to these spheres. So remember that this is the shadow color. So the shadow is gonna be 50% to black. So if I wanted to make this one a red sphere, then I would go kind of 50% to black and fill it with that color. So I'm just gonna go around and so we'll keep this one gray. Let's make this one like a very dark green. And let's make this one gold. So here and around here. So you can pick, like, if you want a sphere that's this green color, you just go towards black and pick the sort of halfway mark, and that's going to be shadow color. So this is going to be a very bright green sphere. And let's make this one a nice purple color here. This is a really good color picking exercise too. Well, let's make this one a nice light pink. And what color did we not use? I don't know, we can make this one another, maybe like a dark brown. No, we can do better than dark brown. Let's do, oh, why is it so hard to pick a color? Jeez. Okay, let's make this one green. This color green. Okay. So we have shadow colors like this, and when we turn our lights back on, it's like magic. They just they light those spheres. And if we add the toning color, so if we want a warm light source, then we can play around with the warmth of that light. So let's make it just a little bit warm, and then as we add the other lights, you can see how it changes the value of that sphere. So now we can colorize these other lights. So let's make this second light hot pink, so we can see what that light source is. So right now it's like green, but if we make it a hot pink, that's what it does there. And if we bring up the intensity, it becomes more white, and if we bring it down, then it's not as intense. Let's bring it something like that. And if we add the third light, let's make it like a cyan. Now we have, so these are just the ones down here. So we're kind of making it like a blue color. We said it was going to be a bit of a skylight, and you can see that's what it does there. So almost like magic, you have colorful lighting on these colored spheres, and nothing is muddy, and everything looks like it works. Like you can almost not go wrong with this. If you light your spheres, actually, I'm going to add just a quick color. So this is basically desaturating the color underneath. If you add your light sources in a way that makes sense scientifically, like if it reveals the form properly, if you're kind of following the rule that it's filling the form up to that terminator and then stopping, so that you have no light in the shadow except for any light that bounces up. Basically, if you get your basic principles of lighting right, everything else, like the color of the light and the intensity and all that stuff, you can basically do, kind of procedurally, I guess. Like it doesn't require any skill. It just requires kind of good decision making, so that your light source doesn't become, too bright or too intense, but it'll still be kind of physically accurate. Like if you have a super bright, an extremely bright light, it's going to blow out the highlights. If you're too close to the sun, you won't be able to see anything. It'll just like create this extremely bright effect. But this is still kind of physically accurate. It's not like not right. It's just ugly. so if that makes sense. Like there's a difference between having good taste and being completely wrong. Yeah. So I'm just gonna bring that back. Maybe we can make this a little bit more intense. And yeah, so that's basically like how the lights are set up, how the system is set up. And we could talk a little bit about color theory. So take a little sip of my coffee. So the main something you can think about when lighting your objects is what colors are you choosing, but like not just what colors are your light or what color are the underlying spheres. You can really think about the overall hierarchy of your illustration. So for example, are you going to have warm highlights and cool shadows, or a cool highlight and warm shadows? Do you want a complementary color scheme like orange and blue, or yellow and purple, or do you want like a tertiary, like a three color kind of complementary, like red, yellow, and blue? They're the triangle in the circle of colors. Basically, that'll dictate what you kind of use as the colors of your lights, but it'll also dictate the colors of your spheres. So for now, we're just going to deal with the light. So I'm not going to look at the colors of the spheres. So if we look at the point light, right? Let me take the color off of these ones. So if I use a warm light source, you can see when I take the light, the color sort of out of the other lights, those become cool. They become a cool sort of gray, and that's because they're referring to that, the relationship, I should say, to that yellow or to that orange, that warm orange color is much cooler. So it's going towards blue through gray. So if orange and blue are on the opposite side of the color wheel, you're getting cooler as you go to gray. You know, if you start at orange. So yeah, so basically what I'm saying is currently this would be kind of like a complementary color scheme. It's not super pushed, but it's there. You have warm highlights that come up as this orange color, and then your secondary light is like a very cool light source. You know, it's not blue, but it's much cooler than orange. So it's kind of going towards blue through gray. If you wanted to push that even more, then you would take this second point light, and you might tone it like a blue color. Now, if you make it as saturated as a blue, or if the blue is as saturated as the orange, then you're going to confuse your audience, because you like one needs to take precedence over the other. So what I would do in this case is I would tone it blue and bring the saturation way down, and maybe the intensity down too. So now it's just slightly toning that second light source blue. So now the orange is dominant in this 2-point lighting, and the blue kind of falls as like your secondary color. So another thing, we could change both of these. For example, if we wanted to make a let's say like a yellow and purple scheme, then I would just shift both these colors a little bit over to something like that, and you see they're playing off each other in that beautiful complementary way, where you just have the two opposite colors kind of vibrating against each other, which creates a really nice kind of soft. It's very appealing to the eyes. So let's look at this this 3-point lighting for now. So I'm actually going to mask out. I'm going to put a little blocker up here, so that we're just paying attention to these now, since we're getting into different lighting schemes. So if you're introducing more light sources, you can either introduce a new color, but it needs to harmonize with the other colors. So in this case, let's bring this back to the orange and blue one. So we'll make this more orange, and we'll make this more of a cyan blue, and let's bring this back to that normal like gray color here, so that we don't have the values of the other colors too much. Okay. So primary, secondary colors, primary light source color and secondary light source color. Our third light source color can either play off the orange, like if we just want a complementary color scheme, it can either play off the orange or play off the blue, right? So you could have this other rim light, it could be close to orange. So if I take this and bring it close to orange, you could do something like this, you know, have another orange color or another warm color that really punches out and accentuates that warm element, and you can make this really intense if you wanted it. So this would be overall a very warm color scheme. What am I doing? I did this wrong. Okay, let me go back. Abort. Okay, this color. Okay, let's colorize that. So this could be a very warm color. So you can see how that's just accentuating that like the warmness of this whole color scheme, right? Or you can make it more blue, and accentuate the cool kind of complementary. So, you know, you could do something like that. But in both cases, it's either part of your primary or your secondary color. So it's falling into that family. And you can see the you know, what it's doing here on the colors I'm choosing. Like these two colors are paired together, and then you have the blue, or you have, you know, if you move it over toward blue, you know, then these two colors are pairing together and you have the orange as your key light. So that's for a complementary color scheme. If you wanted to do this sort of like triadic, I think it's triadic, like where you're using 3 colors on the color wheel, then let's say you do red, yellow, blue, you'd have a dominant color. So let's start with this this orange one. We'll make it like we'll make it blue. We'll just start with blue. So this one's going to be your the most dominant color. Then you'll have your secondary light source. Let's make it yellow. But it can't be super saturated, right? It needs to fall secondary. And then our tertiary color, we can make it, where's red? So we can make it red like this. So you can see now the dominant color is blue. And to find where those colors really resonate with each other, you need to play around a little bit with the exact hue. So my color was a little bit too cyan, which made, you know, the blue wasn't mixing nicely to the red, and it wasn't mixing nicely to the yellow either, because it was kind of like getting muddy. But you can see when I move it a little bit more toward purple, you get this nice mix here where it's going purple into the red, and it's getting, you know, it's going like cyan greenish into the yellow. So it's kind of like, I mean, with this, it's really easy to just shift your colors around and test out what looks good and what doesn't. And then I can play with the intensity of the different light sources. Yeah, we have this sort of triadic color scheme going on. If we wanted to shift this around, do like another example, we could do like a green, use the secondary colors like green, yellow, or green, orange, and purple. So we can make this one like a green. And I'll go a little bit more toward blue, like a purpley blue. You get this funky lighting scheme. So like a triadic color scheme is always kind of funky. You know, they're not as it's harder to sell, I should say, like a triadic color scheme to someone than a complementary color scheme, because complementary colors, they just you see them all the time in nature, and they're just easy on the eyes. You know, whenever you see something in sunlight, it's always going to have a warm highlight and a cool shadow. So that like orange blue or yeah, like yellow purple, those are super common, and yeah, they're simple and really appealing. The other thing you could do is just pick, you know, one color and have your whole color scheme revolve around that. So let's pick green, for example. So you could pick, you know, everything in green from like this cyan to, you know, going into yellow. You could just use that as a range of colors and pick any color in that, and they'll always harmonize together. So we'll keep this green one. Maybe we'll make this, you know, that sort of yellow, and then we'll shift this over toward blue. Maybe bring this intensity down a little bit. So now you have like 3 colors in the same kind of cool green family. You have a warmer green, kind of middle green, and a bluer green. And you see they all kind of work together. This is something you'd see like in a forest. Those mixes of greens, those lush greens. So those always work together, and it works for any kind of color. If you were to choose orange or purple, like we can do a pink scheme. So everything, let's say we do everything from red to purple, you know, everything through that range is freebie. So if we colorize this, make this like a bright pink. You can make this more of a red. And we can make this more of a purple. Now it looks like Valentine's Day. So you can see the light colors, they're kind of all falling in the same family. Looks like one of those bags of Valentine's Day candies. And yeah, it works. Just like, looks like a gumdrop now. Okay, let me reply to your question, Callum, that I've been reading for the last while. Okay, interesting. So would you do drawing, shading, lighting, all in grayscale? Then when you go to color, you place it. Yeah, you can. So if you watch the video that I posted yesterday for this Jesse character here, and we'll talk about this now, for yeah, like this. I don't have all my lighting layers. Well, I do, but my different examples, I'll pull them up. But yeah, like I did my flats first. So before lighting, I did all my flat colors, and then I lit my drawing based on, let me bring this back. Okay, let me just neutralize all this, because I set up this super dramatic lighting. So I lit it like this, and then I did my other light source, my second light source, and then I set up my lighting scheme. So I already had I chose my flat colors. I didn't light it in black and white. I lit it in color. But if you want, you can light it in black and white. Like, that's the nice thing. Like, you could just like have it like this, and then you light it like that. Sorry, like that. I didn't bring my shadow in. Let me bring this back. So you could just have it like this, and then light it like this in black and white, and then you do your flats. And this is kind of cool because you can have this like gray clay model almost. This is like very reminiscent of a 3D object. So have this like flat. Anyways, but yeah, when I lit this, I didn't have the colors. I just lit it with white lights, so that I could reveal the form and the materials the way I wanted it, and then I added the colors. You know, I did all my crazy coloring stuff with cool shadows and stuff. Okay. Uh, yeah, no, it's for sure. Like if you need, I mean, I think I spent the first 3 years of painting digitally just working in black and white, and then finding different ways to apply color afterward. Because learning to see value and form in black and white is so much more important than color. Like color is so secondary. Like there's like value, and then way down on the scale there's color, because you can like color is just about the sort of storytelling element, but to make an image actually read properly and to see form, your value needs to be on point. And I do discuss that a little bit in the way I set up my value. So go check out that video. It's only like 25 minutes, compared to my other three-hour videos. It's nothing. And yeah, I talk about like how I set up the drawing, how I set up my colors and the shadow layer so that the values work with each other. Yeah. I mean, they're like, to paint, you absolutely need to see value first before you start painting directly in color. Because like it's just so much more important. And you train your eye to see value. Okay, let's bring up so I'll bring up, I posted these on, actually I'll just bring up my Patreon, because there's the high-res images. So let me just bring this down. Okay, so now we can talk a little bit about some of the different color schemes that I put in here. So here we have like a complementary lighting scheme. So we have a very warm light source, and then we have cool shadows. So I tinted the shadows a bit of a purple color. You can see it in there's a bit of like a purple hue here, even on the warm skin. And you can see that, yeah, everything in shadow is kind of cooler, either purple or blue. And then the secondary light source, you can see it really well here, is more blue. So it's not like blue, like electric blue, but it's a little bit more blue than gray. And the fact that it's toned just that little touch of purple or blue, it just resonates so much more against this really orange highlight, and gives that very natural, golden hour look that you see every day if you look outside between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. or when sun sets. Next we have I think this is the classic cyberpunk one. So again, another complementary lighting scheme. In this case, I'm just using more of not a complementary lighting scheme. This is more of like a cool lighting scheme, but I'm using everything between purple and green. So on the far range we have this pinkish purple, and then we have this bluish purple, and the green is kind of getting picked up from the underlying clothing. But overall, this is just two colors resonating against each other, the pink and the blue. This is like just one color, everything in that sort of cyan green range, which is why I called it aquarium, because it looks like it's under the sea. Under the sea. Okay. And yeah, so everything harmonizes well together because it's all in that color range. Another complementary one, orange and blue. I just reversed it now so that the key light is blue and the secondary, the rim light is orange, and that kind of it tells a different story. You know, the key light tells the story of, you know, moonlight, or yeah, probably moonlight hitting her face and arm, and you know, she's escaping in the night, and then maybe this orange is like an explosion that's happening behind her, or she's just leaving a building or something, and this warm inside light, which is secondary, is coming to illuminate her back. Here we have a nightclub, so we have a very white light and we have a very pink light, so this is kind of just playing in that pink range. The light is also slightly, sorry, the white light is also slightly pink, so you're getting that a bit of that pink bleed going into the shadow. And yeah, it's just a very light, you know, a high key lighting scheme. And yeah, that's just, you know, if you just type up nightclub on Google, you'll just see a whole bunch of pink and purple. So that's what it kind of reminded me of. So maybe she's escaping from a nightclub, who knows. Here we have just green, everything green, which kind of feels, green always feels ill, especially if it's light. Like a green light, you know, makes it think of Frankenstein, or you know, I put toxic environment, like a chemical plant or something. So that's always like a good way to use green. You can also use green and red. Those two colors are very off-putting together. Not in the Christmas way, but in the lighting way. Like if you light with a green and red light, it's kind of disturbing, because red light tends to crush a lot of your colors, as we'll see in the next one here. Oh, here. So like a red alarm or something, you can see how much kind of detail and form is lost when you light something with red. It just doesn't have, I mean, red is the shortest or longest wavelength. I think it's shortest. You have like infrared, ultraviolet's UV is the longer wavelength, I think, and then infrared, I think, is the shortest. But anyways, there's something with just the way red works. It just crushes detail, and so it creates this kind of like uncanny description of form. And when you combine that with green, you have this kind of sickening green look. It just makes for a very, you know, off-putting lighting scheme. So these were just different tests, and then on this red one, I just use a white light to, you know, to bring out the form. But I could use, you know, like let's say I make this red. Where's red? Red. How did I do this? Oh, I think I colorized the shadows. Yeah, so let's say I have like, I'm not going to spend too much time balancing all this, but let's say I have a very red thing like that. I could use green here. I'm gonna have to go even into, yeah. You know, something like that. Balance that. So now we have this kind of green red light scheme, which is, it's just like, I don't know, I find it nauseating. reminds me of like a couple movies where they use this in kind of disturbing scenes. Honestly, I don't find this works well for the illustration because it's not the kind of illustration where you'd want this lighting scheme. You'd probably want much more of like a playful color scheme, or like that Moonlight Escape one I think works really well too. So yeah. Okay, well, I see you guys are very awake this morning, asking lots of pertinent questions, and huge crowd, 4 people. So I won't drag this on too long. If you guys have questions, though, drop them in the comments, and I can answer them while I have this Photoshop open, or my lighting practice one. But that's gonna cover lighting for today, and I hope you guys learned a little bit. Feel free to pick up to grab the practice file and try stuff out, experiment, play around with layer modes and all the different ways of combining different colors together and different lighting schemes. Like, it really comes down to just experimenting, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. Yeah, you can always rewatch it later. So yeah, thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you in the next workshop. I'm really excited to see your this month's character design challenge too. So get that done. We got one week left. 7 days. 1, 2, 3, 9 days. 8 days. I don't know how to count. So get those done. Post them in the Discord. And yeah, peace.